welcome back to day 4 of the Southasia Lectures 2025. Uh, today's case study, or today's context is India, and we have Dr. Rao with us, Dr. Nitya Rao. Dr. Nitya Rao is Professor Gender and Development at the University of East Anglia, United Kingdom, and Director of the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development. Nitya brings deep experience and understanding of farmer livelihoods in contexts of climate variability, economic precarity, and social inequality. Driven by a commitment to social and gender justice, her work over the past 4 decades has a strong focus on the impacts of change and innovations on improving well-being of people, especially ensuring food, nutrition, and livelihood security. Nitya is a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub and Commissioner for EAT Lancet 2.0. She served for 2 terms on the steering group of the high-level panel of experts to the Committee on Global Food Security. She has published extensively on these themes in international peer-reviewed journals alongside book chapters and media. Over to you, Nitya. Looking forward to learning
Yeah,
from you.
thank you so much, Swarna, and nice to see everybody here in the audience. So I think you can tell me if you can see my slides, Swarna.
Yeah. Yes, perfect.
Great, great. Okay, so I think as per your topic, I'm going to talk on climate policy and climate justice. But I think, given my own expertise, and I have come to climate from a gender lens, so I think I will also talk a little bit about, some of the research I have been doing with gender and why it matters. So I think the first thing to say is that, what are the climate related challenges? And I think, this is just a picture from Cyclone Gaja and Nagapattinam, Tamil Nadu 2019, and you can see the sort of sand buildup and the possible effects on communities. And I think as I speak, we are having these terrible cyclones in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. I was listening on the news this morning that more than 1,300 people have actually died. So I think that's an extreme kind of response or an extreme impact of climate change where people lose their lives. But I think mortality is clearly one of the impacts that we are seeing, and which I will talk about a little bit. So this is from one of the studies that I was involved with recently, where we took the CEEW, that's the Center for Environment, I think Ecology and Water, their data on climate, and really mapped to different sort of agroecological zones of India. So the map on the left really shows you the exposure to hydromet disasters. This includes, the definition of hydrometeorological includes droughts, floods, and cyclones. So I think as we speak, we can see the effects of cyclone in Tamil Nadu and the whole Bay of Bengal, or the whole east coast of India. Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat, of course, are more drought prone. The map on the right shows the impact of heat waves. And again, we can see that some parts of India are now exposed to very high the red and the dark maroon marks, but also the orange and the brown is also, the expanding impact of heat waves in India. What is the impact on people of each of these? I just give a few examples here, not comprehensive. But with temperatures, for instance, we see that over the last 40 years or so, that there has been a significant warming trend of almost 0.15 degrees centigrade per decade. So it's pretty fast going up. And also, the frequency and intensity of very warm days and warm nights are projected to increase over India in the next decades, while that of cold days and cold nights will decrease. And I'll come in a minute to the impacts of heat and, not, especially night temperatures, and not being able to sleep properly at night, its impacts on people's health and lives. Second, again, we can see rainfall, and this we are all experiencing, that the monsoon mean rainfall has been very variable. It has been declining over the last more than 50, 60 years, especially over areas in the Indo-Gangetic plains and the Western Ghats. So at the wrong time, and also the not the variability in terms of not coming at the wrong time. And I think this has also contributed, because of this climate stress, to sort of increased male migration from these areas of the Indo-Gangetic plains, UP, Bihar, and so on, which were very rich agricultural lands. But you see most of the men now in some parts of southern India, Bombay, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, Kerala, and so on, because of the lack of ability to depend on their own farming. Uh, the third example is really what we are witnessing now. So I don't need to say that, but it is the extreme sea level events, which are also projected to occur frequently over the tropical regions of the Indian coast, with mean rise in sea level and climate extremes. And I think this frequency of extremely severe cyclonic storms has increased over the Arabian Sea, but I think we are also seeing over the Bay of Bengal, which leads to short span, very high intensity rain occurrences. And I think for people in Chennai or other places in Sri Lanka, of course, confronting, in even middle class people who have, good houses, confront lack of access to power supply, electricity, not being able to go out. So we can clearly imagine what will be the effect of those in low lying areas or in informal settlements, and how they are managing. I was listening to a BBC broadcast this morning from Indonesia, which actually said they had a voice from Sumatra, and the person was saying that we don't have any food even. So please, can people help us? So I think in everyday life, especially for those who are poorer, these impacts are much more severe than for the better off or the middle classes. We often, and my own work has often focused on rural areas and looking at the impacts on rural populations and agricultural households. But of course, on cities and the impact of urbanization and the impact of climate change and climate extremes on cities is very visible nowadays. And I will maybe talk a little bit about it in terms of, government responses and so on, of that, about city planning, how settlements are located, and so on. So this is just three examples from cities which are all the time, I mean, a year on year we have this problem. The first is, of course, Mumbai, and these scenes of year on year flooding and the city life coming to a standstill is very familiar to people in India, and these are becoming much more severe now. And as I said, for the poor, because of low-lying, poor drainage, and also 60% of Mumbai is in informal settlements, even though we hear about the wealth of Mumbai. So I think these settlements are particularly badly affected. Ahmedabad in Gujarat, close to Gandhinagar, the capital, but subject to very high impact of heat, which has been increasing. And I think when we talk about mortality, the heat related deaths have really been, the numbers are pretty stark at 17,600. And then Gorakhpur in UP, which is also, of course, the constituency of the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, has severe waterlogging problems, lack of solid waste management, and therefore high incidence of infectious diseases, again, every year, including malaria, encephalitis, and so on, because of waterlogging problems. So, I think in terms of just identifying some of these risks for human beings and human well-being, as I've already said, I think we have heat stress and exposure to extreme heat, hot days, hot nights, especially in cities, is going to lead to mortality, morbidity, but also, inability of labor or declines in labor productivity. And we have seen cases of informal sector workers, rickshaw pullers, street vendors, vegetable vendors, under very hot temperatures, not really being able to have any business at this point in time, and therefore also earning less, which leads to, of course, all of this, the livelihood crisis leads to a lot of mental stress. But I think there is also evidence of reproductive health. And therefore, I think as part of the heat action plans in Ahmedabad, for instance, they are thinking that in hospitals, for example, your pregnancy and maternity wards should not be on the topmost floor, which are likely to get very hot, because this can have implications on both the mother and the child in the absence of air conditioning and so on. Water scarcity, of course, a decline in water availability, water crisis. I think we always see scenes during droughts of women in particular having to go very long distances, as in Marathwada, for instance, or North Karnataka, to fetch water. But also the business, of course, that those this again leads to an increase in inequality, where you have small contractors and so on, bringing water tanks and water trucks to settlements which don't have access to water. But of course, people with money can afford to purchase this water. When I've done work in Tamil Nadu, in the coastal areas of Kadalur and so on, because of poor water quality, almost all fisher households now have to depend on purchased purchased water, because they cannot drink. So there is an issue of lack of water, but also the water quality in terms of salinity, intrusion, and so on. The third big element where I have been doing a lot of work has been on implications for food security. And of course, there are projections that with climate change, both in terms of rainfall variability and temperatures, that you will have declines in yields, especially in the tropical areas. So, with global warming, the more temperate areas of Europe, North America, etc., the yields of wheat and other crops may go up, because they'll have longer warm periods. But in places like India and other places of the tropics, actually the yields are likely to go down. So I think this will also, there is an issue of global inequality as well in terms of outcomes of climate change on food security. But the other very interesting research which has been done by some of my colleagues in environmental sciences here at the University of East Anglia is to actually look at the nutrient content of some of the major cereals, so rice, wheat, maize, and soya. That with global warming, actually the protein content of rice and wheat is also likely to decline by almost 15 to 20%. So this means that actually, even if we have enough food to eat in India, in the coming 20, 30 years, by 2050, 2060, the nutrient content of these grains will be much less. And therefore, I think, for India, for policy, which we're not really thinking of, the need to focus not only on climate resilient grains, but also on protein sources and protein content. And similarly, I think flood risks, that we are amongst the top 20 countries which are in Asia, which are exposed to very severe sea level rise and associated flood events. So I'll move to the next point. I think, having set out the sort of the risks of to climate and climate change in India, just look very briefly at what has been the state response to climate change. So, of course, we have a National Action Plan for Climate Change, the NAPCC, but this has not been updated recently. But this really focused on sort of 8 missions, and to go on mission mode in terms of addressing 2 elements of climate change. One is the mitigation, that reduction in fossil fuel and so on. So we have the National Solar Mission, and in fact, National Solar Mission gets the maximum amount of budgets of all of these missions, but also on others, on water, on Green India, on knowledge, on the Himalayas, sustainable agriculture, but also on sustainable habitat, which deals also with cities and energy. So uh, there has been, of course, assessments of climate change. Even though this at this COP, I think India is a very large country, doesn't necessarily report in terms of its nationally determined contributions. And I think this came up as an issue in the recently held COP in Belém in Brazil, that India hadn't reported. But I think even though India doesn't report, as I just said, India does have these various missions, and it recognizes that the problem of warming, as well as the extreme weather events and so on. So it does have its own assessment and its own plan to address some of these issues. Unfortunately, I think the last budget in 2025-26, even though it acknowledges these climate risks, but there are inadequate allocations, particularly to adaptation measures. So, as I said, there are two parts of responding to climate change. One is the mitigation. And there, of course, as I said, the largest share goes to the solar mission to shift from fossil fuels to renewable energies. But in terms of people and in terms of adaptation, I think there has been very low or hardly any growth in budget allocations. So this is one smart cities, of course, we have heard of, and in a way they were kind of bit disastrous again for the poor. But there is now this notion within this sustainable habitat of what has been called as the climate smart cities 2.0, which is part of the mission's focus on three pillars of performance, that is livability, which is interesting, economic ability, and sustainability. So I think theoretically there's a very interesting framework for assessment that they have developed, which includes five elements. uh, the mobility and air quality, I think very important, particularly in places like Delhi in India and North India, where we have very low air quality. Waste management, water management, urban planning, green cover and biodiversity, and energy and green buildings. So I think actually a very well thought through assessment framework. But as I said, that we have a lot of thinking around this and we have these frameworks, but how much, and how holistically is it actually being implemented, I think is remains a real problem. In terms whether it is waste management, I remember in Chennai city itself, maybe 20 years ago, some NGOs had come up with a, waste segregation and so on, and then gradually it all collapsed. So I think we don't have proper kind of interventions. It comes in fits and spurts, but not really in an integrated way. Air quality is the biggest problem. I think there is a lot of denial. Delhi is a very good example that uh, despite having certain measures in place, I think just before Diwali this year, when we always have a problem with fireworks, the Supreme Court lifted the ban on fireworks, leading to spike in air pollution, and really no measures being taken to really address these problems. But I think so. This is the gap. There is an implementation gap. I think the thinking in how to address this is very much there. So this was taken from my colleague Chandni Singh at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, which has been doing a lot of work also with the government on heat and adaptation to heat. And we have these heat adaptation plans, which are now expanding to more and more cities. And I think this is very interesting that when we actually look at implementation and what are the kind of actions. So I think Delhi is at the very basic level in terms of very incremental, doing some awareness on heat risk, some school timings, changing outdoor work hours, and so on, but not really enough. I think there are other cities which are actually moving, much more forward in terms of really responding. As I said, especially in Gujarat, Surat, Vadodara, Ahmedabad, I think they have moved Rajkot. They have moved some distance from very incremental measures to trying to think about really addressing some of the problematic features of the system. Like I said, the pregnancy wards, not to move from upper floors of hospitals, and similarly the emergency wards to be moved to have cooling facilities and so on. But I think when we think of really transformative, if you want to follow that circle, in terms of heat, even that, it's much more structural. It's in terms of how do we protect the water bodies and the green spaces in city master plans. In Chennai, we know that all the water bodies have more or less been built up and leading to this flooding. How do we amend our building codes? How do we revise labor codes for heat safe outdoor work? So these have to be much more transformative measures. I was in Kochi recently in April when there were some very hot days, but they said that okay, in Kerala they have said that 1 to 3 in the afternoon you need not work, and you can compensate for evening work. But it's very difficult for, let's say, construction workers, especially women construction workers, because the construction site may be far away from home. If you don't work 1 to 3 and sit in a shelter, and then have to work 2 extra hours in the evening from 5 to 7, you don't have enough time then to come back home to do all your cooking, the care work, the domestic work, and so on. So I think these things of how can we compensate also in terms of wages, rather than just giving 2 hours off in the afternoon, is something that really needs to be thought about. I think Pune is one of the cities which is actually perhaps becoming one of the most progressive in terms of its thinking around these various frameworks. And this is a case, picture is from Ahmedabad, but I think I was just mentioning Kochi, where I was in April working with the Center for Migration and Inclusive Development, and what they have done in partnership with Kerala government and the health mission Kerala is actually to produce these heat advisories in different languages. As I said, there are a lot of workers from North India, from Bengal, from Orissa, from Andhra within in working in Kochi, and therefore they've decided that actually you need to really bring these heat advisories within people's local languages in order to address even the awareness issue. Another of the missions is the National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture, and again, I think it has some interesting points in terms of soil health, water management, rain-fed area development, sustainable agricultural monitoring, um, and so on. But again, these are very, very siloed. They are working in very siloed kind of compartments, like a tick box approach, rather than looking at how can these work all together. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in terms of what's going on. We did a study with Chandni from IIHS and Divya Solomon on in India, of course, more than the National Action Plan. I think what is interesting is that every state, all the 28 major states, have state action plans in India. And we did an analysis of 28 state action plans, and this paper was published a couple of years ago, 2021. And it was very interesting that we did this analysis looking at it mainly from a gender or a more disaggregated lens, that how far do these action plans really recognize that, there's a lot of inequality and the effects of climate change on different groups of people is going to be different. So what we found is that very unevenly discussed. So out of these 28 action plans, actually 43% of, or 12 of them, had no mention actually of any kind of disaggregation or gender. They just talked about communities and rural, urban, and so on, either in terms of vulnerability or in terms of adaptation actions. So clearly, we can see that if the plan itself doesn't think about it, then its impacts are going to be low. There was another 11 which was sort of had some targeted interventions for the practical needs, and there were 5 actually: Uttarakhand, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Tamil Nadu, and Nagaland, which had quite a sophisticated portrayal. But having said this, I think over the last 2 or 3 years, many of the states are revising these action plans, and I think now they are beginning to take on board uh, some of this differentiated analysis and the need to have a differentiated analysis within their climate action plan. So I think that's a good step, that over the last 2 3 years there has been some shift in terms of these state action plans. So the final bit is really to look at social justice and climate justice, particularly from resilience perspective. So I was one of the co-authors of the Global Hunger Index, which is brought about each year by a group of NGOs, the Wealth Hunger Life, the Concern Worldwide, and IFHV. And last year in 2024, the theme of the Global Hunger Index was how gender justice can advance climate resilience and zero hunger. And we really set out a framework for gender justice, which had the 3 R's, or the three sort of elements of redistribution of resources and opportunities, very critical, of recognizing difference. I think even before redistribution, unless and until we recognize difference, that people are differently located, the better off can have air conditioners, they can respond to heat much better than the informal worker, we won't really be able to address this problem. And finally, I think taking on board the voice and representation within decision making fora. Who's making decisions? We really don't know about this. There's not that much scope for consultation, discussion, and so on. Many times these laws and so on are put on the website of a particular ministry, and citizens are given 28 or 30 days to respond. But again, if you're all the time sitting and watching, maybe you can respond to it. Otherwise, you miss the opportunity to respond these diverse perspectives. This is again a bit of a dated study, but I think the Global Gender and Climate Alliance. But I think I just wanted to show this graph to show that, of many studies, 130 studies that they reviewed in terms of climate impact on health from a gender perspective. The orange bars are sort of women, and the blue or the purple is for men. I think we find that, women are sort of affected much more severely, reproductive and maternal health definitely, but also in terms of maternal illness, food insecurity, death and injury from extreme weather, and across studies. Infectious diseases is something that it seems to be that men again are worse affected, probably today because of huge male migration from these areas and having lack of proper accommodation, particularly in urban informal settlements. So this was a study which I was part of, which was conducted by the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation last year. Uh, and these are just two graphs. I think there are many more in the study if people are interested. This is available online. That when we look at these exposure to hydromet disasters, which I showed in the start, and two variables I have taken here. One is girl child marriage in India, and the other is intimate partner violence, both drawing on the National Family Health Survey over the last decade. So it's quite interesting that the red is really where there are very high exposure. So the left graph is girl child marriage. So you can see the left has got high exposure and also high in girl child marriage. So Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Central India, and also parts of Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh. But the green is again very interesting. Tamil Nadu, Kerala, this also has high exposure to hydromet disasters. But here, actually, there is low girl child marriage. So I think the point to make is that these are not insurmountable. If we take account of justice, or if we think about gender inequality and gender justice, there are ways and means of addressing these unequal impacts on these specific variables of gender inequality. But I think the same places, when we look at Tamil Nadu in the right map on intimate partner violence, actually it does very badly. So, with high exposure to these hydromet disasters, I think intimate partner violence is very high in southern parts of India, Andhra, Telangana, parts of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and actually central India is not doing so badly, like Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh. Maybe these are the more tribal pockets as well, but they're not doing so badly in terms of intimate partner violence. So I think the green blobs actually on these maps are quite interesting, which show high exposure, but an ability to actually put in place policy measures to respond to some of these impacts. So, as I said, from justice perspective, we have these three dimensions of justice, and I just take a few minutes more to give some examples of these three dimensions of justice. So I think with recognition, I think it's, as I said earlier, it's very key, because of course the power, the voice, the agency that people belonging to these different groups have is very is different. It varies the capacity to respond even to these climate effects. So taking account of what we call as intersectionality, but really looking at these different differences, recognizing these different differences by age, by wealth, in the case of India, by caste, by location, maybe pregnancy status, elderly. I think these become very critical. In many parts where I work in tribal India, in Jharkhand, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, that with male migration, actually also due to climate change partly, but also other drivers, aspirational drivers as well, in terms of getting better opportunities, the labor contributions of women really intensify for production but also, and of course, all of agriculture, they have taken over more or less alongside their domestic work. So some of these pictures are of women managing the field, but also of tribal women in Orissa coming to the market. And this is the other thing, that with men absent and remittances or transfers not so regular, a lot of what they grow or cultivate is also sold rather than consumed. And this has, because of the pressure for income, also for health expenditures, this has adverse effects on health. And the big issue, I think, the elephant in the room is really care, that who has time for care work. The men have gone away. Earlier they would share. This is again a picture from Orissa in the top, that typically amongst the tribals, the men would participate in some of these care care tasks, but now with migration they are not present, so they can't really participate in care tasks. Women are busy in the farms, in the markets, and I think this is really having implications for child health and nutrition. And we see that there's no improvement in India over the last 10, 15 years, all that we may have done, but child stunting, child wasting remains very, very high, one of the worst in the world. And I think India calling itself a middle income country, but these figures are really very bad. Uh, the second element, redistributive justice. So, as I said, I come back to the National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture, and this promotion of climate smart agriculture, uh, which is fine. But I think we did a study, a paper recently published on different climate smart practices and its implications. Very good for sort of climate change, so increase productivity, increase resilience, and so on. But the last three columns, if you look at on in blue, on the impacts on women in terms of their time and women's control over the income derived. So let's say take the example of conservation agriculture or on farm tree planting, which have high labor inputs from women. It requires time from women, but actually, women have very little control over the income that is derived from this. Whereas something like improved home gardens or nutri gardens or kitchen gardens or whatever, I think there's multiple names for this kind of scheme, also has high labor burdens, but from women, but at the same time, the impact on women is much higher. So I think when we talk about climate smart agriculture, I think it's quite interesting. We don't often think about the different practices within climate smart agriculture and how it redistributes both labor and time, but also control over income and decision making. I think one of the things that women are often taken as labor, and I think one of the things which is not happening enough by the state, even as part of this national mission for sustainable agriculture, is how do we really give women the new skills and technologies which are needed to recognize or to enhance sustainability, including recognizing unequal power relations in knowledge production. So knowledge or apps or technology is still continued to be seen in male domains in agriculture, even though women are the ones doing it. So I think a lot of NGOs and civil society have been doing interventions. On the top left is from some of the work of Aga Khan Foundation in Bihar, where they're training women to become, para vets, giving vaccinations for goats and so on, better fodder varieties, which improves, which also reduces emissions, but also improves the livestock health. I think, with organic agriculture and sustainable agriculture, the government has been setting up these missions for bio input production or whatever, or research centers actually, not yet on a large scale. And again, on the left bottom is an example from the MSSRF, which has been doing training women to produce these bio inputs rather in to replace chemical fertilizers and pesticides. But these are very small scale, they are not mainstreamed into government programs. And I think that when we're thinking of redistributive justice to address climate change, then really taking women as and recognizing their skills and building their skills and knowledge is really very, very critical. Also taking their knowledge. So the final case is the woman on the extreme right from Wayanad in Kerala. you know tremendous knowledge of different kinds of yams and roots and tubers, very, very nutritious, very climate resilient. But most of these are now, most of this knowledge is disappearing. She knows about 19 or 20 different varieties of yams, but in the markets, you will not see more than 3 to 5 varieties of these yams. And the final dimension I would like to talk about is representational justice, of really voice decision making, putting women at the center of food systems in terms of planning, uh, peer learning, making farming plans, consumption plans, and so on. Can be used. I think this is a big movement from the rural livelihoods, from the livelihoods side, from the Ministry of Rural Development on the rural livelihoods missions, and you have huge number of self-help groups across states and so on. And how do you really bring in some of these sustainability dimensions into that? So in Bihar elections recently, they said that the Jivika Didis, or these livelihood, the women involved in self-help groups, were hugely responsible for the victory of the ruling government, and they have been given money and so on. But I think money is, yes, correct, but they haven't, as I said in the previous slide, I think they have not really been engaged in the same way unless there are NGOs or civil society organizations involved in terms of skill building, knowledge building, planning, and so on. And this is really my last slide about, therefore, I think to improve women's representation, I think nothing, at the end of the day, we need collective action. We need, you know, building women's leadership on the ground to demand rights, a range of rights and justice. So this is from Anandi in Gujarat, that they also set up, not only trained women gram panchayats, but also set up sort of nyaya samitis or justice committees for them to really demand some of these rights, to negotiate and deal with government agencies and so on. So my final slide, what are my takeaways from some of this work? I think, we know that some of these associated impacts, we've been witnessing them in our daily lives. They are not new, but they're increasing in frequency and intensity, and the imperative to adapt is very, very clear. If we don't, we might cross some of these, as the IPCC calls them, the tipping points, which will then have cascading impacts. And I think very important is that these cascading impacts are socially differentiated. Rural women and children are often the worst affected, but as I said, gave examples, also informal workers, street vendors, elderly people, and so on. So we have multiple feasible adaptation options. I showed you one example from that climate smart cities, in terms of how we can do this. But I think there was a evaluation of 168 adaptation projects in India, which actually rated less than half as satisfactory, and most were only moderately likely to be sustainable. So I think this is an area in India that we have a lot of good thinking, but we need urgent design improvements and implementation. We need money to be put behind it, because policy instruments exist, but funding has been declining over the past 5 years. And finally, I think from my perspective, whether it's policy, research, or action, needs to be based on the principles of gender and social justice. Thank you very much. I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Nitya. Um, well, I, for one, am speechless because I'm listening to all of this and thinking, how is it that we can know all this but still be where we are? And I think Delhi's pollution is a great example of an apparent inability to move in any direction at all. So, anyway, uh, the chat box is open for questions, and I know Raki usually has one. So, while we wait for her, I'm still processing some of the things I've learned today, including, I think, for both Lalita and me, was the fact that the nutrient value of food is also going to change, something we don't think about. I think we don't think about any of these second and third, I don't want to say tier, but phase changes. We look at what is immediate, we look at the flood, we look at the drought, we look at the water shortage, but we don't really think about And then what? And then what? And then what? We certainly don't think about intersectionality for the most part. So, yeah. So there's a question in the chat. Based on income impact, what would you suggest regarding women's daily wages based on climate intensity cities, including based on the Kochi break example, such as like minimum price in agriculture? And from Dr. Anbara Begum, what percentage of women are involved in farming and climate stress areas in India? What agricultural changes have occurred due to CV and whether women are recognized as farmers?
Okay, so maybe should I take one or two questions, Varna, and then come
Yes,
back?
yes. The two of them that were up just now. One is from Kiran. The one about daily wages is from Kiran DM. And the one about women in climate stress areas is from Anvara Begum. And Raki adds a comment that TN has a good climate action plan. So, how can we improve implementation of these?
I think that's the million-dollar question, really. That in India, we have always been good at language, good at making good plans. Everything is there in paper. I mean, if we have to do just a review of the paper, then everything is there. But I think the key problem is implementation. Budgets in terms of how these are done. They don't have a justice lens. So it's very welfare approach, and we see this more in the last 10 years, that everything is a patronage, goes from top to bottom welfare approach without really taking into account what people want. Anyway, I'll take the question on what will you suggest regarding women's daily wages based on climate intensity, such as a minimum price. I think absolutely. I think in India we have, Kiran, huge income inequality. I think there's a huge rush of people from all across India now going to Kerala, because Kerala offers the best minimum wages compared to all other parts of India. So even when I have spoken to workers from Odisha or Bihar or Jharkhand who earlier went to Gujarat or Maharashtra, they're now all moving towards Kerala because of the higher daily wages. I think we definitely need to build in, climate intensity. I mean, a lot of the West, not for climate change reasons, but is moving into, 4 day. This is, of course, for formal sector, into 4 day. It is very different for informal sector, which is a majority of our workforce, and women is moving into 4 day weeks, that kind of thing. But I think that the daily wages or the minimum price definitely has to improve, and probably the number of hours also of work need to be adjusted for women, given that we don't have any facilities for childcare, and those are other things which I haven't even mentioned, that when we talk to women, especially women agricultural workers, the government announced, with lot of pressure from again NGOs like mobile creches and the forces, that the need for childcare and creches in the rural areas, because a lot of women now, with men absent and care a big question, are going to work, and there's nobody to look after their children. I think with fertility decline has taken place in India, and most children are in school, which is a good thing. So you don't even have other children at home, especially in these tribal areas where the government has been promoting boarding schools or residential schools for tribal children rather than in the village. So I did a editor opinion piece in Hindu on this whole issue of childcare workers, but the government again has sanctioned like 10,000 or 17,000 creches under a scheme. Again, we have schemes called Palna scheme, and 10,000 have been approved, but only 2,500 have actually been set up. So I think if you really expect women to work the full 8 hours, then we need to create an enabling environment, like, and with the break for the heat, then you need to create enabling environment like childcare services, feeding for these children in women's absence, and so on. You cannot expect to stretch women's day from 8 hours work, but within that 2 hours of rest for heat. So it's already 10 hours, and then coming and going, that's 12 hours, and then another they'll spend 3 or 4 hours doing cooking and cleaning. I think it's completely unreasonable. So nobody has thought. I think this gendered time use is something that really there has been no thought within any of the climate change policies. So sorry for a bit of long winded, but uh, TN has a good action plan. Yes, I think TN has indeed a very good action plan, and we have a very good action commissioner actually for climate change in Tamil Nadu. So I think sometimes it's also bureaucracy. You get good officers who are willing to listen, who are willing to partner, and then you make better progress in terms of what can be done. Uh, there were a couple of other
There was
questions.
one on women in agriculture.
I can't seem to see it.
Yeah, that's
Could you read
kind of
it out for me
disappeared.
again?
Yeah,
I can't
that
seem
is
to.
this seems
It's
to have
disappeared.
disappeared actually. The
I was
question was
trying to
how
go
many
down, but
women?
I can't find it.
No, no, it seems to have disappeared. I think the question was how many? What is the percentage of women in climate stress
Yeah,
areas in agriculture?
yeah,
And obviously
yeah, yeah.
mitigation.
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent question. And I think we don't have the data. Unfortunately, we don't have census. I just saw in the news, in India, that we never had the 2021 census. It was only the 2011 census. The government yesterday has announced, I think, that in 2026 and 2027, in two phases, they will conduct the census operations. So we know which are the climate stressed areas as the map that I had showed, but we don't really have the population figures. I would say that especially in these areas like the whole northern belt of the Gangetic Plain, Bihar, Jharkhand, some of the eastern areas, the overall figures are supposed to be 52% or something from the labor force surveys of women. But I think in these areas it will be much more, because my own fieldwork and experience shows that most of the men in these climate stressed areas, they migrate for work. So I think it's almost 80 to 90% will be women who are working in these climate stressed areas managing agriculture. And I'm not sure if there was another question which you mentioned at the start, Swarna. I have
Yes, one
forgotten it.
coming has just come in. How involved are local communities, those who live in live these precarious lives, in both the creation of action plans and their implementation? I imagine that varies across states.
Yeah.
And there's another comment. I'm not clear what was being suggested by the image showing areas of climate stress and early marriage domestic abuse. There may be association, but that doesn't necessarily show causality, does it?
Yeah, correct. So I'll take both these questions. So in terms of the local communities, so I think again it varies. So in our study of the 28 state action plans, the four or five which were doing well, like Uttarakhand, I think there they did have actually, it was a very systematic process of engagement with communities. I mean, we don't know whether all the voices came in, but at least there was some process of having district level, block level meetings to get a wider participation into these plans, and that is reflected in these plans. And partly it might be because some of these plans were funded by the UN, for instance, the UNDP and UN Women, which kind of insisted, I think, on a more participatory process. So I think that, having said that, it is there in the plans. In terms of implementation, so this is a difficult question because I think the budgets are not there. National level, we find a decline in budgetary allocation. I think it's a larger issue of how states then allocate budgets when they don't get a portion or adequate portion from the center. So there is one question there, but in general I would like to say that communities and households have to adapt because it is their survival. So what we have seen, that actually across the board, in India, but I think also in South Asia, that if you actually look at all the adaptation activities that are taking place, 80% are financed by the communities themselves. Let's say migration is an adaptation activity. Community takes a household, they borrow, they do something with their jewelry, they mortgage it, they take the opportunity to migrate, to earn money, to remittance, to provide remittances to their home as a survival strategy, as a coping, or as an adaptation strategy. So the government really doesn't hasn't done anything in our present. One of the projects I'm working on now is really looking at migration as adaptation, given that so many poor people are migrating, but none of our cities have actually taken on board migration migrant workers as a constituency whose voices should be heard, who should be given benefits, who should be given good housing, water, infrastructure. Most of these migrants stay in informal settlements which are low lying, which doesn't have pakka houses, which doesn't have access to water, which are prone to flooding, and so on. So I think there is really an issue of uh, the as Swarna you said, in terms of looking at the sequential impacts of climate change on populations. And if we really want to facilitate adaptation, then we need to give, starting from safe methods for remittances, safe housing. So the migrants who are going, let's say, from a flood prone area of Gorakhpur or wherever to Kochi, they're not again in a settlement which will get flooded when the monsoon rain comes in, again prone to disease and so on. So I think these become very important to take on board in terms of adaptation. That community is spending, I would say, 80%, and we really need to support uh, this community investments with a much more holistic policy.
The second
Uh,
question was about
Domestic
causality
abuse and
correlation. Yes.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But I think when we held other things, we in the analysis, I didn't go into the statistics, but we held other variables, we took all other variables, and we held it taking other variables into account. We found that climate aggravated impacts in these high exposure areas to these particular variables. So I think we did take into account. So it's not that the other areas don't have, but I think these highlighted areas in the map is where we took, holding other things the same, accounting for all the other variables. We looked at the impact on the exposure to high hydrometeorological effects on some of these gendered variables. So yes, I think we can't show one-on-one causality, but I think there is very clearly an association that we can find, and that field studies also show. Like in Marathwada, I think there are studies that show that as migrants have to go for sugarcane cultivation, and again linked to labor. So the labors is taken as family units in sugarcane planting and harvesting, and therefore there is a pressure now to go as couples. So even at 15, 16, both boys and girls are getting married so that they can go as a family group and get employment within sugarcane plantation and cultivation.
I think just to add a sentence to that, Nitya, I think there's a broader correlation, those of us that have been working on gender based violence, between any kind of crisis, conflict, economic crisis, climate crisis, and higher levels of gender based violence. So there's a broader context for looking for this as well. There are two
Yeah.
other questions, three actually, from Nisha Onta. Do you think gender and social inclusion in climate action can only be pushed at the local level, or do you also see a role of regional, that is South Asian, gender and climate change evidence based advocacy?
Yeah.
Uh,
So maybe I'll just quickly take that and then go to the next. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think definitely there is a role for regional gender and climate change evidence based advocacy. In fact, it was very disappointing, Nisha, that this year in the COP, uh, we lost actually in terms of the gender statements. So the final COP declaration hardly says anything, and I think that's because of the political climate, where there is a real pushback on gender. In the US, you can't even use the word gender anymore. It's seen as a bad word. So I think South Asia, I mean, India and China claim to be leaders in COP, but I think definitely we need, advocacy from South Asia, from the regional level, to point to the importance of taking a gender integrated approach. And I think, from my perspective, when I take a gender justice approach, it also includes men. No, like a lot of these poor migrant men are also suffering with the impacts of being away, mental stress. If they can't earn whatever it is, they can't send money home. I interviewed migrant men in Kochi who said they keep very little for themselves, and every week they try to remit 3 to 4 thousand out of their 5,000 what they earn uh, to their homes. So I think there is really an issue that we need to push for here.
Dr. Anvara Begum's question is, have there been changes in agricultural practice due to climate change, whether women are granted farmer status, and whether they have a say in the type of production and decision making for migration? And I will just read what I think will be the last question, just from Lalita Ramdas. Given your experience on the ground, what is working and why? Who should take this up to put the pressure where needed and budgeting, prioritizing the terrible conditions for women's work?
Great. Okay, so let me go to Anvara. Anvara, absolutely. I think, in fact, next year, the FAO has just announced yesterday, the Food and Agriculture Organization, 2026 as the International Year of Women Farmers. So, actually, in India, I'm part of the organizing committee. So, the Association for Agricultural Sciences and a couple of government departments, ICAR, and so on, are having an international conference. It's a global conference, so I will share the information about that with you, Swarna, to share with this group in March 10th. I think 10th to 12th is the dates of the conference. But I think this we pushed for this because I think this is exactly the thing. While you have an international year, we have not seen any changes in women are not granted, in very simple terms, farmer status. Farmers are still men, and uh, I think there's a big push to get land titles, or even if not land titles, to get women on the record of rights, what we call as the 712 or revenue records, to get them listed as farmers so that they can get the benefits that go with that. So, Prime Minister, for instance, in India has announced schemes like PM Kisan, which is to give some cash transfer to farmers. None of this comes to women because they are not given farmer status. So that is a very categorical, and I think we have to really push. And I think with next year, we are trying to use with several women's organizations and networks in India, including the Makam, which is the Mahila Kisan Adhikar Manch, several NGOs with some well-wishers in government and like the Agricultural Association and ICAR and in the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. They seem to be listening to us, that really create a push for a simplified mechanism to, because we get caught up. I've been discussing with legal people in Maharashtra, because Maharashtra government is keen to take this up to give women farmers status. But the minute you have a meeting with the Maharashtra ministries, somebody or the other will create a problem that no, you can't do this, you can't do that. Men will this thing, women will double take from the families, from the natal families, from the same old arguments. A pushback on women farmers' rights, which we hear will be there. But I think there's absolute need to do this, and more so, I think, in a context of climate change where women are becoming the primary farmers.
And on that note, I will thank you, Nitya, for this wonderful talk. Just really, every day I come here and I learn so much. I just hope I remember all of it um, in ways that I can use and contribute to exactly what you are describing, given our circumstances. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you to everyone who attended today. We will be back here tomorrow, same place, same time, to listen to Dr. Abdullah Nasir speak about the Maldives, which has been a pioneer in climate change advocacy. So I hope you'll all come. Nitya, thank you so much again. This was
Thank
really
you.
wonderful.
Thank you so much, Swarna, for the opportunity, and look forward to working with you on this.